Good morning and welcome. Thank you again for joining us for what I believe is the heart and soul of this amazing conference. That is the digital enablers for sustainable mobility. I would like to start by welcoming our very distinguished guests. We have them lined up here and we'll introduce them one by one as they are asked to speak. A few updates on our speaker lineup. Andy Polisami of Ford Global Mobility is under the weather. Appropriately so for the weather we have today, but he wasn't able to join us. And we have, thankfully, Tatiana Peralta Quiros, who will be filling in and making a presentation. The second change is we have a great honor to welcome the Executive Director of NACTO, Linda Bailey, who will be closing out the session with us. And now for a quick description of the Pecha Kucha format, or chit-chat in Japanese. The presentation will consist of an oral presentation by each one of the presenters, accompanied by 20 slides, limited to 20 seconds each. We're giving flexibility to the speakers to extend that time, but decrease the number of slides. And of course, they cannot go over 6 minutes. You will be monitored and warned appropriately. Any questions from the panel? No? Okay, let's get started. Digital technology is catalyzing a revolution in mobility worldwide. The impacts of this revolution extend beyond new business models such as car sharing and bike sharing, as companies, NGOs, governments, and others increasingly use digital tools to enhance the capacity to target action in pursuit of more sustainable, equitable, and safer transportation networks. Advancement in data collection and analysis allows municipalities to better understand safety risks, for example, areas for female travelers, thereby enabling targeted action to alleviate safety issues in existing transit systems, new software algorithms that rapidly and automatically evaluate traffic camera footage for accidents and near accidents enable urban transport engineers to identify existing accident risk zones in near real time. Integrated fare collection systems foster more efficient public transit networks by reducing consumer waiting, and have made it possible to take smarter and more effective action to address some of the enduring challenges that transport engineers and policymakers face worldwide. More specifically, presentations for this session will discuss how digital technologies can enable sustainable mobility by making transportation more efficient, accessible, green, safe, and gender inclusive, the 4 pillars of our sustainable mobility for all. This session is envisioned to demonstrate practical applications of digital technologies in enabling sustainable mobility, with each presenter's work serving as a case study to support this theme. And now for the first 2 speakers. Please welcome Alyssa Fisher, the Program and Policy Manager from Brisk Synergies. She'll discuss how Brisk can help city officials have a deeper understanding of road safety issues. Alyssa will be followed by Mikhail Marin, who leads the community team at Mapbox. Mikhail will discuss how Mapbox worked with DC Department of Transportation to develop an open data model for each to help DC reach its goal of 0 traffic fatalities by 2014. Alyssa?
Hi, my name is Alyssa Fisher, and I am the Policy and Program Manager for Brisk Synergies. We're a small startup based out of Canada, and we use data, video analytics, and AI to help cities understand the risks on their roads and prevent accidents before they happen. As many of the people in this room are likely very aware, the urban population is rapidly growing from 50% in 2007 to 70% in 2030. Similarly, the number of cars on the roads will double by 2050 from 1 billion to 2.5 billion in 2050. And for those reasons, it's not really a surprise that nearly half of the world's traffic fatalities occur in cities. And that's no small number. Almost 1.3 billion people, 1.3 million people die every year on the roads around the world. It's the number 2 cause of death worldwide after heart disease, beating out all types of cancer, all types of HIV/AIDS, and any diarrheal diseases. It's the number 1 cause of death among young people, ages 15 to 29. And additionally, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are more likely to be involved in traffic crashes and often live in areas with lower quality infrastructure. And because they're walking and biking and taking public transit more, they're more at risk. Luckily, over the past several years, there have been a number of global processes that have sought to tackle this issue. That includes the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN Decade of Action on Road Safety, the Habitat 3 New Urban Agenda, and the Brasilia Conference on Road Safety. All of these are countries coming together to say that they will not tolerate traffic deaths any longer in their countries. Now, what does this have to do with the work that we're doing on the ground in cities? All of these global agreements come together to help facilitate the creation of regional collaboration networks, which then help facilitate the creation of national level policies, which then help finance and create policy around local implementation and solutions in the city, at the city level. The Vision Zero Network is one example of such a regional network. It is a network that brings together cities and countries around the world who have all decided that they want to create a vision for zero road fatalities in their countries and cities. The Vision Zero vision is that traffic deaths are not inevitable, but rather that they're preventable. That we can't design our streets based on the idea of perfect human behavior, but rather that we have to integrate human failure into the way we design our streets. Now, typically when we audit a street to understand, what is happening on the roads, why people are getting hurt, we need 5 years of traffic data, of incident data, of collision data. And, that's not acceptable. We don't do that with any other public health crisis. When you think about heart disease, for instance, we don't wait until someone has had a heart attack to say that you need to go, exercise more, you need to eat less red meat. Rather, we look at surrogate indicators like cholesterol and triglycerides to help monitor heart health and prevent unhealthy outcomes. We can do a similar type of analysis on road safety. We can clear the cholesterol from our roads by understanding what surrogate indicators look like and how we can prevent them. That's what we do at Brisk Synergies. We use computer vision and AI to evaluate near misses and identify those surrogate indicators and help cities identify risks. One of the surrogate indicators we look at is called post-encroachment time, which is defined as the difference in the time between any two vehicles coming to the same point on a street. For example, those cars were 0.88 seconds from colliding. This cyclist and car are 0.96 seconds from colliding. And this pedestrian and this van are only 0.26 seconds from colliding. The lower the PET in any kind of incident, the higher the risk. So with this kind of analysis, we can identify high-risk locations, we can help monitor road user behavior patterns, and we can help measure the improvements to any kind of intervention that a city might deploy on a road or at an intersection. Excuse me. So how do we do this? We tap directly into cities' connected camera networks, which exist in many cities, not all, but many cities. By tapping directly into the video streams, we then download this data, run it through our AI machine, and then are able to upload that data and take the learnings that we get to inform cities what's going on their streets and how they can make them better. We are a Canadian company, so a majority of our earlier cities that we've worked with have been in Canada and the US, but thanks to partners like the IDB and the World Resources Institute, who are both here today, we've been able to expand our work into cities in Africa, South Asia, South America, and more. And we're excited to continue growing. So in all of these cities, we do a number of different kinds of analyses. Every one is different because every city faces different challenges. For example, in Mexico City, we did an on-demand analysis using drones to help monitor speeding along a particularly dangerous corridor. In Waterloo, we did roundabout monitoring to help understand why so many people were getting in accidents on this particular roundabout. We also look at pedestrian safety. So for example, in Winnipeg, we looked at driver response time to a newly installed rapid flasher that was installed over this pedestrian crosswalk. We also look at cyclist and pedestrian safety in high traffic conditions, like this example in Montreal. And in New York City, we looked at fail to yield situations on this particular crosswalk. We also have looked at school safety zones to help cities understand how they can make students safer when they go walking to school in Pittsburgh, California. And we looked at this dangerous crossing in India where we tried to help them understand how to make this a safer place, how to get people across the street better. We also looked at illegal crossings and jaywalking in New York City. As you can tell, that's a pretty heavily crossed intersection. And all of these analyses are rooted in a core set of data that looks at speed, that looks at count of cars, and all sorts of things to give us a full picture of what's happening on the road. This data and these analyses can help cities understand what design interventions are best to take. And then once those design interventions are taken, then we can work with cities to help understand the positive or negative impacts of those interventions through before and after case studies, like this next example we're going to talk about in Toronto. There were 2 fatalities in 5 years and numerous collisions at this particular intersection. So the city wondered, would changing the turning radius of that corner lead to a safety improvement? We did a before and after analysis of that intervention and found, after we had mapped out all of the areas where there were near misses and conflicts, we found that there was actually a remarkable improvement. We saw a 30% decrease in high-risk incidents, a 38% decrease in medium-risk incidents, and a 72% decrease in low-risk incidents. At Brisk Synergies, we believe that no road death is acceptable and that all collisions are preventable. It's time to make Vision Zero a reality. Thank you.
I love that. That was awesome. And especially the video where the bicyclist was flipped off the near-miss driver. I'm Mikkel Marin. I lead the community team at Mapbox. We have a program at Mapbox called Mapbox Cities, where we partner with local governments. It doesn't look like oh, surprise. I have not actually seen the video. I've only seen this in a static version. So this is like live, and I'm innovating on as I speak. So this is still, so at Mapbox Cities, we partner with cities to take a people-centered approach to working with data in visualization and use our tools. For example, one of the key pillars of how we work is with open data. And to people in this room, this may look like a valuable data set and something that you can understand. This is from the City of Melbourne, one of our partners, planning applications and the status of planning applications of buildings in the downtown area. But to the average resident of Melbourne, this is not particularly useful. So we worked with Melbourne to take advantage of 3D capabilities in our mapping libraries to present something which could actually be meaningful to the people of Melbourne to understand the current and future plans for their city. Another component of our program is working with our telemetry data. We develop mobile application libraries which are used in a number of applications. Some of the bigger ones are Weather Channel, SnapMap, and Snapchat. And we collect anonymized telemetry globally of over 200 million miles every day. The primary thing that we use that traffic data, that telemetry data for, is to build historic traffic profiles and where we have enough data to do real-time traffic analysis like here in Washington, D.C. And we are an open source company, and so we are a big proponent of cities working in an open source way because many places share similar problems, and this is a way for collaboration in code and building up a common set of resources and knowledge that will be useful to a number of cities. And so, proud to say that DC is one of those cities. So we worked with the Department of Transportation in DC on the Vision Zero commitment that the city has made to 2024 to reach Vision Zero. And this is very early stage work to incorporate all of these elements: people-centered, user-centered design, open data, our telemetry, visualization tools, to determine where are the interventions and the investments that DC should make in order to have the greatest impact towards reaching Vision Zero. DC already collects fairly robust collision data, and they make it available as open data on their website. So one of the first things we did was simply put it on a map and starting to aggregate at multiple aggregation levels, census blocks, and start to see what kinds of patterns we could just find from exploring that data with them. We came up with some simple and naive assumptions that we wanted to test here to look at what was the drivers of these collisions. We had a number of assumptions: the number of vehicles and pedestrians and the number of different modes on the road would lead to a greater number of incidents. Higher speeds would lead to more accidents. And third, that the complexity of the city landscape, the number of features, the number of places people were going on the road, has a correlation with the frequency of crashes. So there is open data that we used, the crash data. We used census data. We also wanted to look at if there was maybe socioeconomic or demographic correlations with collisions. There is some open traffic count data for DC which has been collected, but we largely relied on our telemetry data and analyzing it in a different way than our traffic product to look at speeding and look at traffic volume. And we first looked at all the locations for collisions and aggregated them to intersections or nearest intersection and normalized against the volume of traffic on the roadway, which we could get from our telemetry data. So where is there a higher than average likelihood that there will be accidents, and where is there lower than average? And we then built this model to compare to all those other factors. Perhaps it's not a great revelation, but it was good to have data we found that the more that's happening on the streets, the more there is interaction between pedestrians and bicycles and vehicles, the livelier the streets are, that's where there's more accidents. And the density of features, the density of intersections and of points of interest that people are traveling to has a pretty direct correlation as well. Higher speeds does not lead to greater accidents. But note, we didn't look at the severity of accidents in this analysis, but that's something we want to do in the future. And we particularly looked at schools, and perhaps because of the interventions which already take place around schools to make those streets safer, there was no relationship between the locations of schools and crash frequency. So what we want to do next is continue to work with DC to work with these tools, work with this data, and we're open sourcing the model. We're making our telemetry data available to more cities so that other cities can undertake this kind of analysis themselves. And if this is interesting to you, or if you have other ideas of how you could use our tools, please, you could sign up on Mapbox Cities or just find me after the talks. Thanks a lot. It's perfect.
Excellent. Thank you, Mikhail and Melissa. The Vision Zero certainly has assisted in really rallying the troops and rallying the technologies and rallying the brains around these intractable issues and challenges. And thanks, Alyssa, for showing the power of AI. And definitely through both presentations, it's all about data, data, data. And thank you, Mikhail, for sharing the whole power of open source and the people-centered approach. Next up, prepare your questions, because after these next two, we'll open up for Q&A. Next up, please welcome Mike Davis, the Washington, D.C. lead for Transit Screen, who will discuss how real-time transportation information is making cities smarter, safer, and more livable. And Bayo Oshigun, a cloud and cognitive technical leader at IBM, who will discuss cognitive solutions and the transformational impact it has on global mobility, focusing on operational efficiency, accessibility, and sustainability. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Doyle. You can go ahead and get started. Knowledge is power. Everybody's heard that, right? Everybody believes it, especially folks in here with a PhD, I would hope. We believe in knowledge is power, and we're trying to apply that to city transportation. Before I get into that, I want to just say a couple comments about two big trends we're seeing that have brought us to where we are today. The first is the urban development trend. In cities like Washington, D.C., right here, 15% of the population has arrived in the last 7 years. 15% growth in 7 years in a city that's not really that big if you think about it. Out in Los Angeles, voters recently approved $120 billion for public infrastructure to build out their transportation system in America's car capital. Not to be outdone, places like Singapore, already known for global urban sustainability, are building entirely new cities. Jurong Lake in Singapore will be a brand new city, the world's most sustainable, tied directly to a high-speed rail link with Malaysia. Corporations are getting involved as well. Amazon's HQ2 search dominated headlines here in the United States in both real estate and economic sections for the second half of 2017, and for good reason. It's going to be a big move. It's going to change the way a city operates. One of the main things that Amazon looked for, public transportation. We needed a new host that would have a good infrastructure so that our people could get around without having to use their cars all the time. Even companies that you wouldn't necessarily consider to be falling into this area are taking part as well. Think about McDonald's, for example, home of the drive-thru. Drive up to McDonald's, get your hamburger, get on with your day. Well, McDonald's currently has a corporate headquarters in suburban Chicago that's getting ready to move to downtown Chicago this year. Even McDonald's is taking part. Which brings me to trend 2, urban mobility. There's been an explosion of new urban mobility options in the last 10 years. We've heard of most of them. I like to point out specifically the bike sharing and the ride sharing. That's thousands of cities and hundreds of millions of users in 2 industries that 10 years ago barely existed, and certainly not with the definitions that we know them by today. This has created problems, though, as well, which is where I'd like to introduce Matt. Matt was living in San Francisco several years ago, and he had the problem. San Francisco is just like many of the cities around the world right now. Booming development, lots of options for transportation. But you don't know what's around you at any particular spot, and you certainly don't know when it's arriving. Is it better to take the train? Is it better to take the bus? Would a bike be faster than sitting in traffic in an Uber? Who knows, right? Matt figured there must be a better way. He was frustrated that even when he found the right place to get around, he didn't know if he had made the right decision. He didn't want to be frustrated out on the city streets, unaware of where to go. So what did he do? He figured, what if I got all the data from all of these different transportation providers and put it in one place? What if I created the Switzerland of transportation data? What if I worked with all of the public agencies, all of the private agencies, trains, buses, cars, bikes, ride-hailing, everything, and put that all in one place for people? Isn't that something that would be useful, at least for me as one person, and hopefully for other people as well? The idea was, if we have it all in one place, people will become more sustainable all on their own. We don't need to build out new infrastructure. We just need to use what we have more efficiently. Now, you might ask, isn't this something that already exists on my phone? Isn't this something that there's an app for? And in many cases, the answer is yes. But a lot of those apps are specific to one particular mode of transportation. What if you have 2 or 3 that you're trying to compare? Not to mention, if you're like me living here in Washington, D.C., you'll know that 10% of Metro riders on a daily basis are using an app as part of their trip, while 95% are using public displays once they're already in the train station to see when the train is arriving. Many of you have probably been to Frankfurt's airport and recognized this arrival and departure board. I'd imagine if you recognize it, it's because you've used it. You might have had your boarding pass on your phone, and you certainly had a piece of paper as well, but you're still looking at this public display to decide where you need to go and when you need to get there. So we decided, let's put this in a city. Let's put it in a place where people can use it, not just where they're already getting to. And what you see here is Transit Screen. Trains, buses, cars, bikes, all in one place, all updating live in real time, with the idea being you can get where you're going faster and smarter. This has had a profound effect on sustainability and accessibility of different transportation options. Take the Humble bus, for example. Long known to be one of the best ways to efficiently get around a city, but also known for highly unpredictable arrival times, plus who can find the bus stop anyway? With Transit Screen, we can do both. You see the screen, you see exactly where you need to go, and you see exactly when you need to get there, opening up this mode of transportation for users that otherwise would never consider it. At the same time, the bus isn't for everyone. Picture that you're finishing up a late night of studying at a university library. Do you really want to go out and wait next to this guy for 10 minutes? Probably not. What you can do instead is use a transit screen in your library to see that you have 10 minutes until you need to get to your bus. Wait 8-9 minutes in the library in the safety, and walk out, probably skipping this guy altogether. Speaking of universities, they've been known for a long time to have their own internal transportation networks based on private shuttles to get people around campus. We're seeing that explode now in cities as well, with corporations and private housing offering the same idea. In fact, I use a private shuttle for first mile, last mile every single day to get to the train station on my way to work. The problem is that shuttle only comes every 30 minutes. So if I have a morning meeting and I miss the shuttle, I'm out of luck. Luckily, as you might guess, with Transit Screen, I don't miss the shuttle. That allows me to skip what you see here, which is sitting in traffic as a single occupancy driver, not only going crazy because I'm starting my day sitting in terrible DC traffic, but also contributing to many of the problems that we're trying to solve here in this room. It's pretty simple. Put a transit screen in a place where people can use it, and they can use the options that are already available to them. Which brings us to what's next. We're really excited about projects like this one that's putting billboard-sized screens in transit hubs where people can use it right where they need it most and at large numbers. The idea is more information for more people in more places. We also work closely with buildings where people live, work, and play, getting into their lobbies so that people can use our screens as part of their daily lives, hopefully making cities smarter, safer, and more livable, one screen at a time. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bio, and today I'm going to talk about cognitive solutions and the transformational impact it has on transportation. Hopefully, I'll be able to walk you through how to create a cognitive platform and then provide some client references into how they're using cognitive solutions today in the transportation sector. So globally, there are about 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created each day. And this can be very daunting because a lot of it is siloed and unstructured. The objective is to identify how best to leverage this data and turn that into intelligence. Some of the obstacles which I'm sure some of you are facing today are 80% of organizations are unable to collaborate on common data. 84% say data fragmentation gets in the way. So how can we build solutions that alleviate these obstacles and begin to provide value for our customers and our organizations? At IBM, we fundamentally believe there are three foundational steps organizations need to take to achieve this. The first is to build a robust digital agenda. Second, prepare a cognitive foundation. Digitizing your information and processes, begin to leverage a cloud, potentially hybrid, where you have on-prem solutions and cloud-based solutions. In addition to that, manage the change. So evangelize the cognitive approach across all levels of the organization, and also continue to raise the cognitive IQ within the organization. It's also important to visualize cloud as not just a cost savings mechanism. There are three pillars which value propositions can be achieved. One is from efficient infrastructure, two is modern applications, and the third is reimagined processes. And that's really where you begin to see cognitive value and leverage artificial intelligence to innovate and to operate more efficiently and create more value to your customers. It's also important to have a cloud platform that is built for data and cognitive so that you can begin to realize unexpected insights. And I think that's something that we have to underline. You want a platform that augments your ability to make decisions, that provides you information you might not have thought of or you weren't even looking for, but is contextual. And that means that your platform has to be able to understand, reason, learn, and interact. Here's an example of an enterprise solution that is in the market today. It's called IBM Metro Plus. It utilizes over 500 dynamic and hyperlocal signals in addition to your enterprise data and cloud computing to then provide a platform that ingests unstructured data, significant amount of it, and turns that into intelligence and provides you, the enterprise, the ability to make data-driven decisions, also the ability to augment existing processes. This kind of just walks you through the steps you would take within that platform to achieve that goal, from curating your particular insights into actually creating a platform for the user to experience, a role-based platform for the user to experience the benefits of the information that you are inputting into that system. To kind of summarize that enterprise solution, I think it's easy to see it from this perspective. The first is big data. You ingest that into your system, unstructured and structured, provide a cognitive and analytics platform that has the ability to reason and provide predictive modeling and prescriptive modeling into that data, and then provide a platform where you can begin to see the outcomes and also the desired experience you want your end user to receive. A consumer-based application, which is also the market today, is an app by the Weather Company, which is owned by IBM, and it provides people in emerging markets the ability to communicate with each other without internet, especially when there is a critical weather conditioning happening. So if there's a natural disaster and cell towers go down, you have the ability to communicate through peer-to-peer technology and inform individuals of safety precautions or any relevant information pertinent towards any activity they need to take to stay safe. Here are some customer examples. iTalia, for instance, currently utilizes weather data through a tool called WSI Fusion to get information in real time during flight for current weather conditions. And as a result, they've managed to see significant benefits. Namely, 25,000 kilograms of jet fuel has been saved every month due to optimized routes. Another example is the Department of Transportation of Pennsylvania. They understood that their back-end systems were very time-consuming, and they had to identify ways in which they can automate that and optimize that and begin to use cognitive solutions to identify tasks that are obsolete and are irrelevant so that they can reprioritize their resources and ensure that they're serving their constituents in the most cost-effective manner possible. They were able to reduce scheduled maintenance times by 90% from 10 hours to 1 hour, and they were also able to identify 90% of their tasks were obsolete. So they were also able to save money in terms of doing away with what was not necessary. And lastly, in Beijing, China, IBM is partnering with the city of Beijing to identify ways in which we can create predictive models to prevent or to inform their citizens of impending pollution situations. So if there's a pollution outbreak that's about to happen in 2, 3, 4 days from now, they can inform they can inform their constituents, identify ways in which they can mitigate potential impacts of that pollution, such as redirecting traffic or informing you that, hey, this particular area is not going to be conducive today, maybe take another route, in addition to also spraying water into the air. So this utilizes IoT technology, asset management, and predictive modeling to prescriptively identify ways to mitigate a particular incident and control the flow of traffic. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm here afterwards.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Abayo. Mike, knowledge is power, and I guess the key challenge for all of us is put that in the hands of the people to use it. And the multimodal coordination is really quite phenomenal, and how that's going to be applied and used over and over again, I think showing a lot of efficiencies and productivity. And Bayo, thank you for introducing the cognitive cloud as a platform that we can all benefit from. So now we'd like to open up for some Q&A. Please identify yourself, let us know who you are, and you may direct your question to any one of the panelists that we've heard so far. Step up, don't be shy. It's all very crystal clear. Your presentations were so great that there is not a question left that needs to be answered. But, you know, I guess the ongoing stream through this is, it's about the data, stupid, right? It's about data. Where are the challenges we're seeing from your municipal clients to really get this data, one, aggregated, identified, aggregated, and then making it available? Please give us some idea of some of those challenges you're seeing, because in my view, we're talking about privacy issues, existing legal regulatory limitations. If you can share some of the stories or some of the issues you've faced. Oh. We'll take one more question that's standing, and then you can think about,
Hello.
Fabio, please.
First of all, thanks so much. I mean, it's fantastic and very, very transformative tools and products. You know, as with all disruption, there's always losers. And so I'm interested to see your views, for example, especially in the kind of data that you were presenting. The first presentation, I don't remember, Alyssa talked about a ginormous increase in the number of vehicles on the road, whereas all the other services that you're talking about tend to kind of reduce that amount in favor of, you know, car sharing or bikes and other types of. So what's the car industry response to all of this, and how do they transform themselves, you know, given the kind of disruptive forces that we see at play here?
We'll take one more question, and then you can answer.
Thank you. I'm Manfred Neun, the acting president of the World Cycling Alliance. Yeah, it's all about data. On the one hand, the current data we mostly have in cities are absolutely weak. We have some data from motorized transport. We have almost no data from the active modes. Now, for the future, we are expecting much, much better ones. That's great. That's a fantastic perspective. But the expectation is not so clear, in my opinion, because we will have connected people and we will have connected vehicles. And according to Connected People, we will going for a case study in Copenhagen this year. During the ITS World Congress, we will run the project Hacking Copenhagen, as there will be about 1 million trips in the 5 days of the conference, 200 trips day by bicycles. And we will address the people there with apps to get really connected. Let's say 10 or 20% of the people of Copenhagen, we are really challenging on this, but we will manage it to have a case study on this real in time. Now looking to all the current data providers, we know they are coming with different approaches. So now the question to the experts here on the panel, are we really ahead, or are we still at the very, very beginning to manage this? Because the expectations are high, the opportunities are even higher, but are we really prepared on that? And in particular, to bring the active modes in, because all what we have heard today this very morning on gender balance and also on road safety will be based on the matter of fact that we will prioritize active mobility. Thank you.
Thank you. Great questions. Please, panelists.
Is this working? I was going to address the first question. I think the answer is, if you look at the investors behind a lot of these new transportation modes that are coming up, especially the bike sharing and the car sharing, Daimler, Ford, GM, it's all of the traditional big powers, not just in the United States, but across the world, that are making cars that are now investing in their disruptors. I mean, that's the way it works, right? If you're not disrupting, you're being disrupted. And I think, you know, GM's Maven, Ford Mobility, who is going to be on the stage here today, Daimler, Car2Go, those are really good examples of what the existing huge Fortune 100, Fortune 50 companies are doing to try to stay up with the revolution that's taking place.
I think in addition to that, we also see, you know, you were talking about a lot of car sharing type, you know, disruptors. We also see car companies investing a lot in what's going to be smart mobility, connected mobility, investing in how do we create the connected cars of the future that no longer, that can sense their own traffic data, that can stop themselves, that can make the roads a safer place for everyone. So I think the car companies are really hedging their bets and trying to make sure that they've covered all of the different innovations that might happen, so that way they're not left behind.
If there's one, I mean, there is a massive challenge in processing and analyzing and collecting the data at scale of, well, imagine all of the connected vehicles, the amount, and connected people, the amount of data which is being generated every day. I'm from my own experience at Mapbox, I just know that the amount of work that needs to go into the pipeline in order to derive something of that's insightful is very difficult, but we do it as technology companies. And then connecting that to the reality of the capacities of cities, no matter, I mean, there are brilliant people who are working in cities, but who have very limited resources and lots of requirements on their time. What is the hardest thing, I think, is figuring out as a private sector potential donor or partner in that data set, how do you meet in the middle where we're actually producing something that cities want and need and can make use of? And that's why I think conversation and experimentation together directly with cities is pretty critical.
Great. Anything else to add? Anyone? Great. Thank you very much. Let's move on to our next series. I'd like to introduce Carla Dominguez-Gonzalez, gender specialist for the Transport GP, who will discuss technology as an enabler for enhancing women's mobility and how the World Bank used technology as part of a more comprehensive intervention to address women's sexual harassment in Mexico City's urban public transport. And also Lynn will share with us, she's senior transport specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank, who will share with us and discuss an analysis of mobility surveys and focus groups to examine travel patterns and barriers to access and mobility in Cochabamba, Bolivia, to inform and design sustainable and inclusive transport system. Carla?
So good afternoon. Today I'm going to share with you how can technology be an enabler to enhance women's mobility by contributing to address sexual harassment in public transportation. But the main message that I want to convey is that for this to really happen, technology should be part of a more holistic, comprehensive package that can help us to start changing social norms that at the end is the main root of the issue. So I'm going to start by walking through the differences in the mobility patterns between men and women to give a little bit of context, including the specific barriers that women face in public transportation. Then I'm going to go deeply into a pilot project that we designed and implemented for Mexico City to address sexual harassment in public transportation, where technology was an important part of it. And then I'm going to share with you a little bit about other applications that have been developed and some food for thought to move forward. So now we know that women and men have different mobility patterns. Women normally walk, rely more on public transportation. They also roughly have the same travel time as men, but they travel shorter distances. Why? Because their mobility patterns are linked to the economy of care and household activities, where they have to take kids to school, pick them up, activities related to health. So in this sense, this can constitute a barrier for women's mobility, because women might decide to find jobs closer to their houses in order to be able to take care of all these activities. At the same time, they face a barrier in terms of affordability, and they specifically are victims of sexual harassment in public spaces and public transportation. Why do we need to take care of this? Well, sexual harassment in public spaces and public transportation is pervasive and is a problem all over the world. It's not specific of one continent. As several studies have shown, 2 times Reuters Foundation have conducted this study in different mega cities, where we can see that Mexico City, the 2 times has been there in this list. So, but on the other hand, there's a strong economic argument to take care of sexual harassment in public transport. Limited access to safe transportation constitutes also a limit for women to access better economic opportunities. And as a study of the International Labour Organization has just showed last year, it reduces their participation probability by 16.5 percentage points. So what was the problem in Mexico City? In Mexico City, 60% of trips are carried out in public transportation. 52 of these trips are carried out by women. And statistics show that 65% of women have suffered sexual harassment in public transport. So we decided a lot of policies have been implemented in the metro system and BRT because the infrastructure allowed for that. That is to say, the infrastructure allowed to have, for example, booths where women can report when they were victims of sexual harassment, but this was more difficult in the bus system where we lacked of proper infrastructure. This triggered that there was a lack of data of what was happening in the public bus system. On the other hand, we took advantage of an opportunity because a transport reform took place in Mexico City where bus services started to be formalized. So this enabled to have the proper institutional capacity to come up with a more creative intervention that looked at the root of the problem by trying to address the social norms that trigger sexual harassment. And we separated a little bit of the strategy that the government has been conducted in Mexico City, mainly looking at segregated cars in the metro, having pink buses for women, but at the end, this is just a temporary solution that doesn't go deeply. So we conducted a diagnostic. We found several problems using the IDEO design thinking methodology. And one of them was the lack of peer environment. That is to say, women complained that when they were facing these kind of situations, no one reacted, no one did anything. We also find other problems, as they didn't think themselves that segregation is a long-term solution, that safety should be considered like customer service, quality of service, and an efficient report project. So we come up with this intervention that had mainly 3 components. First, we trained drivers on how to intervene in a no-confrontational way. So we got inspired with a sexual harassment appropriate response program that was carried out here in DC, and we adapted to the Mexican context with the help of non-governmental organization. the good thing about this is that it was the same drivers and operators that designed an action protocol of how to intervene. So we also had a communication campaign. We found in our diagnostic that many people said, it's not that I don't want to intervene, it's that I don't know how to do it without putting myself at risk. So in this communication campaign called in Spanish Hazme el Paro, which means have my back, we were telling both users how to intervene without putting themselves at risk. For example, interrupting the action by giving the seat to the woman that has been harassed, but at the same time, approaching the driver who has been trained and using a mobile app. So we created this mobile app that what allowed was for both users to report when they were victims of sexual harassment, but also when they saw that someone was facing this kind of situation. In this idea of start to creating a more collaborative environment. What happened after this is like an alert was triggered in the center of operation of the bus company, which enabled a message along the corridor of rejection against sexual harassment. And evidence has shown that these kind of messages can be a deterrent. But on the other hand, this mobile app also connected women to the services that can help her to have some support, counseling services, police. And we partnered with Telefónica and Teldat because we know that one of the barriers women face is that the lack of data, no, or phones with no internet. So we enabled these buses with the collaboration of them with Wi-Fi. So what are the results? In 14 weeks of our pilot, we had 62 reports. And the good news is that these reports were not only for the victim, but also when they witnessed that someone else was facing this. We also had reports like more deconstructed in the different kinds of harassment, that is like leering looks, verbal harassment, because many times this is not considered as sexual harassment. So this is a way to start raising the bar to show that these kind of situations are like the entry point to ending in worse situations. So there are other apps that have been developed. In the morning, we had Elsa, who spoke about Safe City, which is like this crowdsourcing app that can, if we look forward about this app and how we start to create a more comprehensive approach, with this data where reports are geo-referentiated, that way you can also start identifying hotspots. And that information can be very, very useful for example, when you are designing transport stations. And then, well, looking forward, I think it's important also to start promoting women as programmers, not only because they know what are their needs, no, but also that way we can start closing the gap of women working in IT. And in terms of sustainability, we also need to start thinking what's the cost of not doing anything. And finally, as I said, like technology in itself is not as a solution, but if it's part of a more comprehensive package that wants to start changing norms, it totally can help us to increase women's mobility and really have sustainable mobility for all when we don't forget 50% of the population.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn Scholl. I'm a senior transport specialist at the IDB. In this work, we use data analysis, a little bit old-fashioned, just using a stat package to do modeling of travel patterns and what the role of gender is in determining women's travel patterns in order to mainstream gender into the design of a BRT system in Cochabamba, Bolivia. Here's the mobility plan that was completed in 2015. We're supporting the study of the first line of the BRT. And we're seeking, as part of the IDB policy, is to promote gender equality in all of its operations. But oftentimes we've seen that this is done mostly in the construction phase. We trying to hire women in the construction. But in terms of planning a system, oftentimes we see that urban transport systems are planned with the average person in mind at the peak hour. So we're trying to do a more thorough job of analyzing what are the needs for women and men both, and what are the barriers for women in terms of accessing public transport and sustainable transport generally. So we have 4 main questions. How do travel patterns vary between men and women? What are the personal security concerns among women? Spatial patterns, as well as how we can integrate this into the design of the system. We do basically 3 main methods, 2, quantitative and qualitative. Thank you. We look at the means, we look at a GIS analysis, and we also do some modeling using the mobility survey that was done for the plan. Thanks. And I want to emphasize that even though this is a data-driven session, that it's important to talk to people. We talked to both the planners in the municipality and did focus groups with them and also with the population to understand things that you may not find in the data. I think that's critical in terms of getting political buy-in to implementing the recommendations. In Cochabamba, so these are some of the findings. We find that working age women are traveling more than retired, and there's a larger gender gap between retired versus working age men and women. And the reason is that the social role of women is still more varied, although there's more women working today than before. They still have a greater role in terms of traditional household responsibilities and childcare, which you also see in the trip purpose patterns. We see that women are taking more trips for shopping and health-related persons and to accompany other persons compared to men. Work and school trips are still the most frequent type of travel. But we see that women have a more varied type of travel pattern compared to men. Because of this, we also see there's a greater dispersion in the type of travel patterns. Cochabamba has a very monocentric pattern, and the plan has a radial kind of configuration for the public transport system. But we see that women are actually traveling more in dispersed patterns compared to men. We also see that they're chaining their trips, so that means that they're more close together in time, different trips throughout the day, and for more varied purposes. So you see among trips which include a chain of trips that has work, school, study, shopping, 70% of those trips are done by women. We also model the time between trips as an indicator of chaining trips, so we see that women have shorter times between the trips, which means has implications for how you time the transfers and how you integrate your fare so that it's more affordable for women who have to travel with more trips close together. Next, please. We also see that women tend to travel more in the off-peak hours, so systems are often planned around peak hour travel. So this is very important to take into account that women are 24% more likely to travel in the off-peak. And you see that in the map on the left-hand side. The blue was off-peak travel among women. Thanks. We also see that women are the biggest customers of public transport. So it's really critical, given that oftentimes the financial sustainability system is dependent upon ridership and tariff revenue, that we really look at women's needs. They also take taxis more. They're twice as likely to take public transport, even if there's a car in the household. They're 3 times more likely than men in the same households with cars to use the bus, because usually the men are taking the car. So it's, again, important that it's affordable and that it's accessible to women. It's not affordable to women, we found. We find that women are spending a higher proportion of their income on public transport than men, particularly low-income women. It's upwards of 30% of their income, particularly women who have children under the age of 5. They spend 26% more than men, and among those who have children aged 5 to 10, it's 32%. That's because they often have to pay the full fare for their children, even though that's not the law in Bolivia. They also are traveling with packages much more frequently than men, and so in focus groups we found that was often a huge barrier to public transport, and they take taxis more often because of that, which costs more, which is another reason why it's unaffordable. And in the focus groups, we found women often were reporting that they had to actually pay more. They had to give the driver more money because they had packages, or they were left behind. They were passed up on the road if they were carrying things. I'm just gonna, I'm sorry. What did I just do? In Spanish, it just says that oftentimes they don't let them on the bus. Also, they're traveling with children, and so they're paying more for the children than they should. Children should be paying half price. We also heard in focus, but they don't. They pay full price, and oftentimes they don't want to take the women and children on the bus because they feel like it takes up too much space. And often women have to travel with their kids to school, even though they're old enough to go alone, because the bus drivers won't let them on, or they mistreat them. The merchants who live in the outskirts of cities. Of the city of Cochabamba often have to get up very early in the morning to travel to the center to sell their goods, and they often can't find buses because there's not service. So we also need to look at the hours of service for low-income women in particular that sell their goods in the marketplace. Finally, we heard over and over again was very sad among school-age children. We interviewed adults, but they reflected back on their school-age years, and it's very widely accepted that you get on the bus and you're, as a woman, going to experience a lot of things, and there's a lot of indifference to it in the system, so there's a social issue there. Recommendations, we have several recommendations that we're presenting. These are tentative at this point because we're working with this city to design the system, but targeting subsidies towards women, particularly those who have young children, designing vehicles with spaces that are safe for children and for packages, longer free transfer times to accommodate transfers, and rethinking the radial configuration, allowing for more demand-responsive public transport services that would cater to the needs of women that need to trip chain and carry packages. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carla and Lynn, for some very compelling and some very also encouraging news that we can do something about this. And it's not just about the data. It's about listening to the stories and the realities that these women suffer and trying to find a digital solution, possibly, or others. Sexual harassment and gender equality, obviously a very hidden problem, is now exposed with effective ways to battle this scourge. Very timely, very relevant, and very much overdue. I'll introduce our last two speakers. Again, prepare your questions for the next series. I'd like to introduce Tatiana Peralta-Quiros, a World Bank economist who will speak to us today about the Lake Victoria Challenge, and Linda Bailey, the Executive Director of the National Association of City Transportation Officials, and who will discuss the promises and perils of automation and how city policies can use technologies to guide people-centric design. Tatiana?
Awesome, thank you very much. So in Africa, the lack of rural transportation infrastructure poses a huge challenge to development. You see, strong links to markets are essential not only to increase agricultural production, but also critical to actually increasing economic growth and reducing poverty. Only about 34% of the rural population in East Africa lives within 2 kilometers of an all-weather road. In some places like Tanzania, this is even less, with only 25% of the people living within 2 kilometers of an all-weather road. You can compare this to places like East Asia Pacific, where more than 90% of the people have access. Africa would need $75 billion of annual investment in infrastructure, maintenance, and operations just to keep with its current level of development. It would need even more than this to actually connect all of its citizens to opportunities. Furthermore, climate change poses an immense threat to the infrastructure in each year, leaving thousands of kilometers in need for critical care, for critical repair, and many roads impassable throughout the year. One study last year actually calculated that the effects of climate change would mean that we would need double the amount of money in maintenance and repair to actually just repair the transportation system. But you see, providing an efficient logistics is crucial not only for development, for economic opportunities, but it's also critical for emergency situations. We can imagine that a patient that has been bitten by a venomous snake, or a woman who is suffering from postpartum hemorrhaging would need care within the hour, or would actually be in fatal or mortal danger. Also, transporting things on the road is often dangerous for the people behind the wheel. Road safety is the third largest cause of deaths in Africa, following only malaria and HIV/AIDS. This is where we think drones can provide a solution to many of these problems. And the key opportunity lies within the dramatic growth of services and capabilities by autonomous robotic delivery systems and unmanned air vehicles. So here at the World Bank, we've been using drones for the last couple of years to do better, to collect better imagery, which actually helps us understand cities better, spatial growth. It actually also allows us to track agricultural production and even in some cases create better cadastres for cities. But East Africa has also emerged in the last couple of years as a global testing ground for autonomous vehicles, for autonomous aerial systems, and is already a world leader for certain use cases. See, this is where Tanzania wants to come in. The Lake Victoria Basin currently provides a source of employment for more than 30 million people. It is the most densely rural populated area in the world, and is expected to increase at a rate higher than the rest of the continent. Given the terrain of the region, though, whether it be by sea or by land or sea, health supplies often incur life-threatening delays. You see, the Mwanza region has a lot of population scattered throughout its own islands, which means that many of the services can only get there by boat. The medical stores department and other entities currently rely on boat transport for the delivery of anti-malarial medicines and vaccines, and also to provide critical care. However, current bus transit times range into the hours and rely on the availability of drivers and are very costly. And also they're dependent on the weather conditions as well as the time of the day. Currently, the MSD spends nearly $1.4 million just in the delivery and distribution of these drugs and medical supplies. This is where the Lake Victoria Challenge comes in. You see, while many other East African countries have actually partnered with specific providers to test the uses of cargo drones, the Lake Victoria Challenge and the city of Mwanza is actually taking a different approach, which is to see if we can actually find an opportunity to leapfrog technology. So what they're doing is, instead of partnering with one single provider, they're inviting a number of different providers in to actually test the different ranges of technology. So the challenge has 3 different goals. The first one is to convene and to promote the best practices and ideas and technologies for the Lake Victoria. Second, it's actually to catalyze, demonstrate, and validate the best technology that will disrupt the distribution of logistics in Africa. And finally, it's to connect local and global entrepreneurs within regional decision makers and strategists. So it has 3 parts. The first one is a conference, which will be a 3-day conference which will host health, technology, and transport experts. The second one is just an emerging tech expo, which will actually display what are the newest and best forms of delivery system. And the third part is actually our 3 different challenges. The first challenge will be the emergency delivery and pickup. And it will have 3 criteria. Can you provide safe, efficient, and scalable solutions for providing services in Lake Victoria? The second challenge will be delivery for emergency services, and we'll have 3 different criteria. Can it be safe? Can it be fast? And can it be affordable? And the third one is using the satellite imagery capabilities of the drones. So the 3 criteria is, can you map, can you locate, and can you assess? To see if we can actually use drones as a survey service for disaster locations. So currently, there are a number of partners, so we're only one of the many partners that are actually helping out with the Lake Victoria Challenge, which will take place in October. You see, the goal of Mwanza is to actually prove that this can be done, and to actually invite a number of different partners in to prove that it can be done. Because you see, at the end of the day, this really isn't about cargo drones or flying donkeys or about the newest and latest tech. But it's actually about sustainable mobility for all. It is, in essence, how do you provide access, which is efficient, safe, and green to the people in the rural areas of Mwanza. So with this, I'll actually finish up with a video because I think I have a little bit of time. Do I? Nope. Sorry. We'll place the video online, so hopefully you'll be able to see it.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Linda Bailey with NACTO. I'm excited to be talking on a panel of such great technology. I'm more coming from the city transportation perspective, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about some work we've been doing that's at the interface of those two things, city transportation and technology. And obviously, we work both nationally here, that's part of our name, and also with our Global Designing Cities initiative, many of whom are here at TT, so I hope you've had a chance to talk with them. The most pressing need, as we've seen it in this space of technology development, is to communicate the needs of city streets and city transportation to the technology providers and developers. There's a lot going on. There's billions of dollars being thrown at the wall right now in this space, and there's still, in our opinion, a lack of understanding on the technology side and the developer side about transportation, about some fundamental ideas. For example, traffic is an emergent phenomenon. If one of these cars is autonomous or has advanced warning systems or anything, it has nothing to do with whether or not this little gridlock will get solved in any near term. It's also something where we don't want to see designs putting the driverless car into a peopleless city. This is a lovely video, if you want to check it out online, that shows cars parked on the sidewalk, and there's not a single human being in sight except for the last moment. I think there's one human being that boards a bus. I'm not sure where that human being came from. But that's a really big challenge if you start looking at this is the ideas and these are the images that we're seeing out there. And as we know from working with city transportation around the world, streets are best served when they're human spaces, when they're safe and inviting for human interaction. We heard a little bit about Vision Zero, the fundamental idea that human error will prevail. There's no known upgrade to human hardware or software on the horizon. Human beings will remain very similar. And so in terms of how we operate in space, we want to make sure that that is safe and inviting. So those are the things I think as city transportation professionals and transportation professionals in general, we need to be communicating more and more to the technology community and understanding how that's going to work. And that also goes to the data side, which I'll talk a little bit about. So we have a lot of hopes for new technology. We hope it'll make things safer, more equitable, more sustainable. But the bottom line is for those things to happen, cities need the right tools, and we need to communicate those things so that those tools emerge. This is a picture that we've now labeled today. This was originally labeled hell, and then we realized, at least in developed countries, this is a lot of what a lot of streets look like, and even in developing countries too. And we want to figure out how do we get to tomorrow where we have really great spaces for cities, a much more constrained travel way that allows for more space for all other activities we want to be doing, transit and biking and walking. So what are the tools that we need? One thing we heard a lot about today, which I'm really excited to hear about all these tools, is we need a way to access all the data that's being generated in the streets. Many countries, we still use hose counters to develop our estimates of what's going on the road. Technology has been around since 1950. There's all this data being generated from the streets, and one of the most exciting things we've been working with is our Shared Streets partner, also supported by Holly in the audience there, working on the Open Transport Partnership, and that we want to tap into some of the data that's being generated by fleets such as TNCs like Uber, Lyft, Grab, the taxi, and using that data to help understand what's going on in the streets in real time. Second major tool we really need is curb management. We need both the policy side and the technology sides that help us manage our curbs. The curb space, is, as you know, is where a lot of things happen, whether it's vendors, delivery. Here we're looking at a mix of vending and delivery in the off hours, some use for public space. Different times of day. These are the kind of tools that we need to be thinking about that have those policies and the technology in place to make it happen. And here we see happy hour. The third tool we need are design standards that are tailored to lower speeds on city streets. Lower speeds are the main ingredient in a safer city street. It means that there's a narrow travel lane for pedestrians to cross. It means that when there is a collision, it's less likely to be life-threatening or life-altering for injury crashes. And it means that there's a more permeable street for all the things that that people want to do in the space with no designated crossings. These are some of the big ideas we're trying to imagine for the future, in the future street, being better for people and not better for robot cars. And really the bottom line, and many of you know this, working in transportation, is that new technology can open doors to the sustainable city if that is its goal, and that will be its goal if we express that and work together across the divide between public sector, private sector, internationally, to make sure our great technology developers in the world are going in the right direction. And this can become a reality. We know that the 21st century city can be a better place. We can have a great place to live for everyone in our cities, our growing cities around the world. And with that, I'll thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tatiana, and thank you, Linda. Tatiana, for sharing the Lake Victoria Challenge and really showing some real live experience using drones. I grew up watching the Jetsons. I'm still waiting to see what we're going to do with flying cars, so maybe that'll be the next iteration. And Linda sharing really a vision and possibilities for really a higher quality of urban life, which we all are becoming more and more accustomed to. With that, we'd like to open up for just a couple minutes, for Q&A, please. Tell us who you are and who you'd like to, if anyone, direct your question to.
Hi, my name is Avital Barnea. I'm with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and my question is for Carla. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that bus drivers in Mexico City are receiving training on non-confrontational ways to address sexual harassment, and I was wondering if you could talk more about the tactics that they're being trained on.
Let's queue up the questions, and then we'll please.
Hello, my name is Jan Kalp. I work for Schneider Electric. This is addressed to Linda and Mikkel. You talk about mapping and urban planning. Have you brought into your discussions or thought process the infrastructure that goes with the new powertrains, mainly electric, and how that impacts your the location and the build out of that infrastructure? Thank you.
Next and final question.
Antoine Cher, French Development Agency. It was maybe more for Mrs. Dominguez. I wanted to ask you if you think about also using existing social networks to signal harassment. For instance, you know, in China or even in the world, everybody's using WhatsApp or WeChat. Is it a way that you want to push?
Thank you for the questions. Panelists?
Hello. Well, I will answer first this question. This was a pilot project, so there was a lot of worry from the researchers that by involving social media, we can have some contamination on the results. But we realized that, of course, relying on social networks could have been an important way to raise awareness, maybe start creating a hashtag of Hazme el Paro, which was the idea behind this marketing campaign. So, of course, social networks will be a way to enhance this. In terms of the training, so we got inspired by the SHARP training program here in DC. That is the training that all the bus operators and metro system had. And it's not confrontational because first it starts with awareness raising among the bus drivers because sometimes, well, many times they are the first ones that are having this kind of behaviors. But later on, like we show them how like the solution, because they were saying, yeah, I will intervene, I'll just go and beat the guy and throw him from the bus. So we were really raising and sensitizing how that's not the way to go, that escalation brings escalation. But if they intervene, for example, by naming the conduct, by letting know the harasser that that's his boss, that he owned the boss, and that he will not allow that. And it's a gradual approach, no? Where you start like with these messages, and at the end, like from a certain distance, no, he could ask the harasser to get off the bus. This accompanied with already a response system that was in place, for example, in cases of robberies. No, they have this. That's why we also went with the formal sector, right? Because they have like these radios where they have constant communication with the police. So that was also part at the end, no? Like if something like kind of escalated, no, they had already like this referral system where they can activate all these other elements.
Thank you. Mikhail?
I'll just take the opportunity to promote the idea of engaging with the public and with open tech communities. There's an amazing project called OpenTrainMap, which piggybacks on the OpenStreetMap project. And I think you're probably aware of how obsessive some people can get about collecting and modeling information on the train system. So they map train system and stations in incredible detail, just for the fun of it. However, there's been in Europe, I think the French National Train System, SCNF, I believe it, they partnered with the OpenStreetMap community in France to map in very high detail the inside of all of the stations. And so it may not be exactly answering your question, but I think there's some really interesting engagement and broadening up the discussion of improvements to that infrastructure by engaging with open technology communities.
Linda?
Sure. Is this working? I just want to say one of the big things that we're talking about that I think I didn't emphasize enough is that we're working on a shared data platform that would be both a place where cities could put publicly available information, for example, about their own fleets or about transit fleets, as well as garnering information from private actors that's anonymous, that is available for everyone to use for transportation planning purposes and also to understand things like safety, curb management, et cetera, because we think that this kind of platform that's like a level playing field and a third-party player makes everything easier for people who are working on this and who might want to do things like map the train system, bus system in their spare time. Why not allow that and promote it? So thanks.
Well, any time left? Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? Any final comments from any of the panelists you'd like to depart with this? It's not required. No? Well, I think, again, I'd like to ask you to join me in applauding the panelists and the time they took and the information they shared with us. Hopefully it's something that you'll be able to use going back to your daily lives, your real jobs, and make a difference in the world. And thanks to the team who put this all together using technology and making it all work seamlessly. Thank you all.